Hello and welcome to another podcast edition of Taiwan Talk, ICRT's weekly interview segment, bringing you conversations from and about Taiwan. I'm Keith Manconi. With transitional justice a hot political topic this year, we've of course been hearing an awful lot about the White Terror era, which is of course the dark historical experience in Taiwan, which followed the arrival of KMT forces in the 1940s. And saw the repression of political dissidents over the span of decades. Now, this experience has been described in the speeches of politicians this year. It's also been depicted in novels, which we have discussed on this very show. But today, we're going to be talking about a very different sort of attempt to grapple with this history. Taipei-based game developer Red Candle is set to release a computer game that is set right in the middle of the White Terror period. It's a little bit hard to explain exactly what this game is like, but I'm going to play a little bit of the music from the game just to set the tone, give you a sense. The gameplay, which is sort of a 2D click-through sort of game. It's set at a school in 1960s Taiwan. And already here, just with this music, you can hear, it does set a tone. This would be in the horror game genre. So we've got a little bit of a mix of horror fiction and history fact all kind of woven together. So an awful lot going on here. To learn a little bit more, I recently spoke with the game's creator. Here's the conversation. All right, so we are speaking right now to Yao Shunting, who is lovingly referred to in English as Coffee. Coffee, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hello.
And also helping us out on the show today is DJ Joey C., who holds down the midday show here at ICRT. This is going to be a Chinese language interview, and he's going to be helping with the interpretation. So, Joey, glad to have you on the show.
Pleasure to be here, Keith.
So just to start things off, this is a very artistically ambitious game that you're doing here. Very kind of grim aesthetic, 2D feel. I played the game earlier today. It really draws you into it. It brings you this creepy, oppressive atmosphere, which is what you were going for, so that's all excellent stuff. Tell us a little bit about what your motivation was here, because you're taking on a lot of stuff. You're taking on Taiwanese culture, Chinese culture, Taiwanese history, a lot of the horror genre. So tell us where this idea for this game came from and how it all got started.
那这个游戏的话，是我2014年左右的时候开始。那时候还没有 Red Candle Games， 那时候是我自己一个人在做独立开发。
So he started the game before Red Candle's game was actually first formed, and back in 2016. Coffee had the idea that he wants to start from a nostalgia point of view, from his personal experience. And the game started being a sensation to then in 2015, where he actually formed a team of 6 co-founders, and they finally start to materialize the plot and the storylines for what would become now the Detention game.
那慢慢的我们的那个核心，其实这一个创作作品的核心其实很简单，就2个字，是那个禁忌。
So the backbone of the story is about restrictions, what you can or shouldn't do, or what you cannot do and shouldn't do.
And that's an interesting concept because restrictions, taboos, I think that gets to the heart of why horror and martial law kind of go together. Because in both cases, there are things that, you shouldn't be doing, or else this, more powerful, scary force that you don't completely understand is going to come down on you. Is that kind of the idea there?
对，就是因为禁忌的话，其实我们就很多种层面有的像是说是从个人的道德。
So it's about different levels of restrictions. They can come from personal morals. It could come from school rules. The game is based in a school, so it comes from the school rules implemented on students. Or it could come from, like you said, Keith, martial laws. Or it could be about religion, folklore, or maybe even traditions of your culture.
Let's think back to when you were developing this idea. First, though, did you start off thinking, I'm going to make a horror game, and then you decided, hey, martial law fits well into that? Or did you start off saying, I want to explore this history, and then you realized, oh, this kind of connects with the horror theme?
其实有点类似这样子，就是我一开始的构想其实是说，我先想做一个恐怖游戏，然后它是在 base 在台湾的这一些元素上面。
Okay, so they did start with the rough idea of wanting to have restriction being the base of the story, but not sure what year, what scope, or what era they were looking at.
因为我那时候我自己个人喜欢看像那个欧威尔他那个1984或者什么之类这一种他反乌托邦的这一种创作。
Coffee himself watched or read a book that I'm sure all of us have read, the 1984 book by George Orwell. And he said that's where he wanted to start, but he originally thought maybe the backstory would be based in the 80s or the 90s, where Taiwan is under one-party rule, but not so quite the martial law restriction. And then it was during an organic discussion with his co-founders that they thought, oh, why not push it back to the 60s, where Taiwan was really under severe martial law and restrictions.
Right, and it's a pretty interesting way to look at some of these historical questions, to look at this historical moment. I mean, a video game, I think it's pretty safe to say nobody's used that as a way to look at this moment in history before. Was that pretty gratifying to you to be able to explore it in that way? What was that experience like?
有没有觉得说你们做出这个游戏让你达到某种效果？
因为其实在做这个游戏的过程之中，其实我们也是在回去探索那一段时间。因为其实像我自己是1979年出生的。
Okay, Coffee was born in 1979. So by the time the martial law was lifted, he was possibly in early elementary school, which means he didn't know much about really what's going on around him. And he studied electrical engineering, which means that post-graduate days, he didn't really learn more about the Taiwan geography or history.
那个时候我们所受的教育，其实我们的地理文学的是 China 的，我们的历史也是以这个中国为中心的这一种。对，那我就会觉得说，我其实不太认识台湾。Okay.
So whatever he did understand about Taiwan geography or history was from his elementary school days, and even then they were very China-centered. So for him, it's actually a way to relearn the history. As he was growing up, the documentation regarding that era could have mixed messages, and even the recounts from his parents could have mixed messages.
其实我们在找资料也好，然后在构成游戏的一些元素的过程中，其实有一种就是在重新学习的感觉。对。
So a lot of it is figuring out what really happened and learning in the process.
Now, in the game, the idea of martial law is very much peripheral. It's very on the side. You don't focus on that very directly. Mm-hmm. The way that the player finds out about that is you just slowly start to get a feeling of what kind of world these characters are in. Maybe they read something on the wall and it refers to the fact that their teachers are all in the military. Or they look at some kind of documentation and it talks about some of the restrictions that they need to adhere to on school, and the characters say a little bit about what they feel about that. So you take it on in a very kind of sideways sort of way. What are you hoping that your players will take away from this?
那其实我们在构成游戏的过程中，我们也是希望玩家他不要去太专注于说，我们那个到底历史上是什么样子，而是在。
They want to prevent players focusing all of their attention on what is the social order of the time or the martial law status. They instead want to just create the atmosphere, and then while injecting where you have most of the game is about horror, and to create the atmosphere of oppression, of restrictions, and horror all at the same time in a horror thriller game, really.
And then what about, let's also ask about the international audience for this, because you haven't even released the game yet, but you've already put in an English translation. So clearly you want this to be accessible to an international audience. Do you think that there's something else in there for that different audience apart from what you're hoping the Taiwanese audience will find there?
那其实我们在开发游戏的过程中，我们本来针对的就不只是 local 的玩家而已。我很希望，当然这个台湾本地的玩家是我们首要的。
So their main target audience or their main target market, of course, is still Taiwanese local players. But they've always thought that this could have an international platform. So they actually, I'm not sure if you know about the gaming platform Steam, where you can download a lot of games. And basically, if you have an account, you can download and become accessible to the different games out there. So they actually have a membership with Steam, and this game is on Steam.
对，那这是我们一开始就有的这个想法。
So while creating the game, they always had the international players in mind, which also means that when it comes to content, a lot of translation or maybe cultural gaps had to be bridged. And luckily, one of their team members actually grew up and spent many years in the States. So he was there to bridge the cultural or the linguistic gaps for them.
Right. I noticed that as I was playing that you were being conscious of what the international players might know or might not know. So now that it's been out in demo form for a little bit of time, just focusing on the English version, what kind of a response has it gotten? Have players? Do you feel like players have learned something about Taiwan or learned something about Taiwan's history?
那像在这个像英文版的方面的话，那我们其实就原本应该说就有点像在做文化介绍。
There were a lot of words or concepts they had to find culturally relevant information or translations for.
那这个就是因为在游戏这一个产业里面他们日本的那个 senpai，那已经变成说大家都已经可以认知到说这个就是有阶级的学生之间的关系。对。
For example, senpai or poetry, any sorts of poems or rhymes. They're first and foremost, if they can't do a direct translation, they will try to deliver the cultural idea first, and then if it could somehow find a way to recreate these poetry in a different language, then they'll try that too. They'll try that as well.
对，那甚至我们去创造，我们的成员他去创造一个叫 linger 的那个词，去那个代表说他那个模型啊，对，就是鬼三爷的那个鬼怪。
Okay, and Coffee also mentioned the idea of 模型啊，是不是？
对，模型啊，
模型啊，
就魍魉，
模型啊 which I believe there might be an English word for. It's basically a ghost that finds a replacement. And it injects itself into a human body and then drags that human body back into. So these are traditional things or belief systems that cannot be directly translated, but it could cover. While it can be covered by 3 simple words in Chinese, you can't quite describe it in English if you don't have the same cultural identity. So they created a word called linger for this particular ghost for us. So these are some of the ideas that could become actually a bit artistic or conceptual for you to understand the game through.
Right. So,
hold on. I just want to ask real quick a short question. How much do you think the music does? How much does it give to this game, and how much does it keep it? How much does music make it come alive?
That's a really interesting question, because as I was playing through, definitely I started out feeling like this game isn't too scary, and then the sound effects really start kicking into high gear, and that's when the heebie-jeebies start coming in.
那在音乐方面的话，其实对于这种类型的游戏来讲，它的比重是非常重的。
So the music of this type of games, they always weigh heavily on how it turns out, the atmospheres that you create, the feelings they give off. And so they actually had the opportunity of having a veteran or really a professional music producer who's worked with TV shows or producing movie soundtracks, the original scores of movies here in Taiwan.
那我们当初在我们团队甚至还没有结成的时候，我那时候有在找说，是不是有兴趣的人可以一起来投入？我们在 Facebook 上面有在社群里面去讲这件事情。
And they actually put the idea on a social media platform or a discussion platform on the internet, and this music producer Chang actually, or producer Chang actually rung in, and he said that he's interested in collaborating with them. So he says a lot of it is actually they got lucky with the music to have such a veteran producer working with them.
So we've already kind of referred to a little bit of the generation gap in this conversation. Of course, you didn't directly experience any of the stuff that this game is referring to. Has anybody who lived through that period, the older generation, have any of them played this game and told you what they thought?
那其实我们在制作游戏的过程中，我也是会去跟家里的长辈去问。
When they first started making this game, he asked his family members, elders, about that certain period of time.
因为我们算
So there was a little bit of a research process that you went through to make this game?
对，会有，我们就会去找一些当年的例如说长辈的毕业纪念册。
Yes, they did do research. And as you guys may know, Taiwanese media seems to be not that good at documenting things that pertain to a certain era. So he had to go in a roundabout way. His research included, like we said, asking family members, but also he had to read some of the novels from that period, or maybe watch some of the movies from that period, or maybe even flip through some of the yearbooks. And AIT, he said, also helped. AIT was very good at keep documenting certain periods of Taiwanese history. So he did a lot of research around the subject to get a feel of what was really going on because, as you asked, Keith, he didn't really experience it on his own.
That's really interesting to me because I've spoken to a number of people that have worked on these historical issues in Taiwan, and a common theme with all of them is I didn't learn this stuff in school. It's not preserved well. It's difficult to get this information, and I had to go through this, and this. To get access to this history. So I mean, in a way, is part of the motivation for this game a certain amount of preservation. I mean, it's a different kind of preservation because there's the stuff you can find in textbooks and there's the stuff you can find in history books, which is names and dates. But this is more preserving a feeling, maybe.
它不像是例如说日期啊或者是名字啊一些历史事迹，而是保留那个感觉那个氛围，对不对？
没错，因为我们在做的过程中，我们就特别不去讲历史的事情，对，因为我们自己都不确定，很多事情我们不确定，那所以我就直接把整个世界观架空。
Yeah, he says you're absolutely right. What he is doing is trying to create, or rather preserve an atmosphere of a certain era, because when you want to find actual documentation or historic documentation about some of the things that you heard went on, it's almost impossible to prove or to find empirical evidence. And so what he did instead is he doesn't give you the name of the school, or excuse me, he gives you the name of the school that doesn't exist. He doesn't really say that this is in Taiwan, but it actually still gives you that sensation that you are somewhere in Taiwan in this story. And he says is that somewhat deja vu vibe that you get from the story that makes it even more creepy because you can sort of identify it, but you don't know where it is.
I mean, could you put into words, do you think? Do you think that you could define at all what that feeling is that you're trying to preserve, that you're trying to bottle up and put in a video game?
怎么样去对诠释定义这个感觉嘛？它到底是一个什么样的感觉？在玩的游戏的时候，
我不知道，就发自心里的恐怖吧。对啊，就因为都是你很熟悉的东西。其实这也是我们 demo 版发出去之后，很多玩家给我的 feedback， 就是说。他就觉得不知道为什么就看得特别可怕，因为有一些玩家可能
unexplainable fear that comes from you when you play this game, I guess, is the idea is what you sort of get. It doesn't tell you where it is. It doesn't tell you how close it is, but you can identify, with the atmosphere, with the school, and the uniform, and that's what really stirs the fear inside you.
And I mean, is there a way in which using a video game has allowed you to explore this in a way that you wouldn't have been able to if this was just a book or just a movie or some other form of media? I mean, it does. I played through the game, and it does. You do feel like you're a part of this because you're making decisions that affects what happens on the screen. And in one case, I mean, you're even implicated in the violence to some extent. You're drawn into that as well. So, I mean, is it really video games, this specific thing that you're doing that allows you to do some of this stuff that you're interested in?
我觉得游戏最重要就是说，你玩家的代入感你在过程中，因为你是操作里面的角色。
Yeah, certainly the aesthetics of the game it gives you an immersive experience that you can't otherwise experience with, say, just literature, just a movie or a book. It says it's the controlling of the character and the interaction with the environment that really turns the gamers from the receiving end to someone who's fully and proactively involved in the game. And of course, being a game, they have to put in elements of survival, of solving riddles, and that I think adds more to the game and to the immersive experience.
All right, so we have been speaking today to the creator of Detention. Him and the other developers behind the game are working hard to get it out by Christmas. Knock on wood, hope they can. And just one more time, the company behind all this is Red Candle. We've been speaking to one of its co-founders, Yao Xunting, known to his friends as Coffee. Coffee Yao, thanks so much for speaking with us today.
Thank you.
And Joey, thank you for helping us out today.
Yeah, no problem. My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to another podcast edition of Taiwan Talk. Taiwan Talk, of course, broadcasts every Monday morning at 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. right after the top of the hour newscast. Just a quick note before we wrap things up. To learn more about this game and see a trailer, you can head on over to redcandlegames.com/detention. Or they've also got a Facebook page. You're just going to want to search on Facebook at Red Candle Games. And a quick programming note, I am out next week, so you won't be hearing from me, but a colleague of mine will be pinch hitting, so watch out for the interview that he'll be posting. And that is it for the show for Taiwan Talk. I'm Keith Manconi. See you next time.